Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. When US President George W. Bush decided to end Saddam's regime, Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, were his weapon of choice. He cited Saddam's WMDs to justify the invasion of Iraq. Hans Blix, the man in charge of disarming Iraq, was not convinced of the US president's reason for war. Blix pushed for more time to verify facts. President Bush countered by saying time had run out and Iraq's next response might be a mushroom cloud. In this episode, we meet Hans Blix to find out if, with more time, he could have averted war, or was the die already cast?
Time ran out for Saddam Hussein with his delaying tactics. His tactic of keeping the world guessing if he had weapons of mass destruction, or WMD, eventually backfired. The US and its allies ran out of patience, saying they could no longer risk the grave potential danger of an Iraq armed and ready with chemical, biological or even nuclear weapons. Against the advice of UN weapons inspectors and without the approval of the UN Security Council, the US and its allies invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam. The issue of Iraq holding WMDs was one of the main reasons for the invasion, but no such weapons were found. Even one of the war's architects, then US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, had to admit that none would be found.
I've believed all along we're not likely to stumble over anything, nor did the inspectors stumble over anything. What's going to happen ultimately is we'll find people, and the people will decide that they want to look forward instead of back, and they will come to us as they are and offer up suggestions as to where one might look and how one might approach it.
In the absence of WMDs in Iraq, supporters of the war say the invasion of Iraq was still the right decision.
Based on what we know today, the president would have taken the same action because this is about protecting the American people. As I said, this is about advancing freedom and democracy in a dangerous region of the world.
But critics say the dubious methods of intelligence gathering for WMDs that led to the war may have grave implications.
This is a constitutional crisis, or the potential for a constitutional crisis, the likes of which the United States hasn't seen since the days of Richard Nixon and Watergate, and it could mean the end of the Bush presidency.
With the current tension over Iran's nuclear program, observers say lessons of the Iraq war weapons of mass destruction should be revisited so that history will not repeat itself.
I am delighted to welcome from Stockholm Mr. Hans Blix, the former Executive Chairman of the United Nations Monitoring, Verification and Inspection Commission. Welcome to Inside Iraq, Mr. Blix. Let me take you back to the eve of the war in 2003. What was the reason for the rush to go to war? The administration seemed in such a haste.
I think the US government had decided that they could not wait any longer than to mid-March because the temperatures would get very high. And they did believe there were chemical weapons, and for the soldiers to fight in chemical protective suits would be even worse. Also, to keep 100,000 or several 100,000 people sitting in a desert waiting for war would be very demoralizing.
You asked for more time, as well as your colleague, Mr. Mohammed al-Barad'i, so that you will be able to submit a report to the Security Council to state once and for all whether Iraq possessed WMDs or not. You were denied that time. In your opinion, was that the same reason you just gave earlier, and that is because the administration did not want to wait beyond March?
Well, if they had given us a couple of more months, I think we would have been able to examine and inspect all the sites that had been given to us by the CIA and by other intelligence agencies. And since there weren't any weapons of mass destruction, we would have reported that both to the Security Council and to the services. And I think it would have been very difficult for them to start the war in those circumstances.
What did you think when you heard the President Bush, as well as at the time, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice talking about a mushroom cloud? Iraq's next response might be a mushroom cloud. Did you laugh, or were you really scared?
No, I think I was rather sad because this was such a propagandistic tone. I mean, there was no way at all that Iraq could have a nuclear weapon. We came in there, and I was the head of the IAEA in 1991, and they couldn't make a bomb then, and we dismantled all the enrichment facilities they had. So it was out of question. It was sheer propaganda.
You mentioned the CIA. Now, with the benefit of 5 years of looking into this, would you say this was an orchestrated a CIA cabal, or was this a huge military and intelligence gaffe?
It certainly was a huge intelligence gaffe. And I think it tells us something about the weaknesses of national civil services. I mean, I have good respect for intelligence, both in the US and other places, but they did bend somewhat to the interest of the executive government they served. And the same was true in the UK. We, as international inspectors, served the Security Council. We were not under a pressure to come out with any particular conclusions, and we were more credible. It was tragic that the governments paid more attention to their own intelligence than to the international one.
Did the CIA keep certain information from you? I mean, I remember reading, and I remember you saying that they say the weapons is in a certain place in Iraq, and you keep telling them, tell us where, just give us the site, give us the coordinates so we can go there. So were you denied specific information?
No, this was in the early phase that they held it from us. And we said to them that, look, you are like having a full library and you don't want to lend us a book. However, as we went in with inspections and started inspections, they did give us the coordinates. And we had perhaps about 100 sites given to us by US and other intelligence agencies. And we had the time to go to about 30 or 3 dozen or something like that, and found nothing. So I don't know, of course, if they held back any sites at that time. I doubt it, because it would have been in their interest that we should find something. So I think they probably gave us what they had.
How about the Iraqis towards the end? Were they cooperative?
Yes, they were. I mean, there was a marked difference. I mean, we were disappointed in the beginning in January 2003. We were a bit disappointed about their cooperation. But I must say that as we got closer and as they realized more and more the danger, they got almost frantic in trying to cooperate. In particular, I remember concretely how they said that, look, we poured a lot of chemical and biological weapons here, and let's dig up the ground and see if we can find any traces of it. I was a bit skeptical, because if you pour 10 liters of milk in the ground in 1990, are you sure that you can find traces of 10 liters in 2003? However, we did, and what we did find were a lot of fragments of bombs, so we could calculate that, yes, their earlier indication of disposal of bombs was fairly close to the truth.
Mr. Blix, one of the tragic figures in this Iraq enterprise is Colin Powell. When he presented his country's case to the United Nations Security Council on February 5th, he was absolutely convinced and sincere in his presentation. But was he conned? Was he manipulated by other quarters within the administration?
I feel sure that Colin Powell was sincere, and we know from media that he had been going through a lot of cases given to him by the CIA, and he had thrown out a lot of cases and say these are not convincing. Nevertheless, when he came before the council and I listened to him, I said to myself that, look, I have to ask our experts to check on these points, and I did. And they came back and said there are a number of points we cannot check at all. There were telephone conversations that were bugged. But there are other cases which they could check and on which they had grave doubts and objections. And so I felt that I have to tell the world that we do not believe in all this stuff. And I did so into the Security Council. And although Colin Powell was very courteous to me, the media were not courteous to me for having said this.
There were 2 channels within the administration. One of them is the proper administration, so to speak, the CIA and all the agencies. And then later on, we realized there was a special office within the Pentagon run by none other than Douglas Feith. And later on, allegations within also the administration that special office manipulated the information and kind of seeped it into the rest of the administration and coloring the entire image.
Well, within the US administration, there were many intelligence services, and after the war, they sort of coordinated them and brought them under one single czar. But I think that complicated it for them. They were ideologically covered, they were convinced that there were weapons of mass destruction, and they were convinced that they had to go to war. And when the CIA didn't come up with 100% what they wanted, then they will supply other evidence, and that would satisfy Mr. Cheney and others who were hawks and who wanted to go to war.
What was the role of George Tenet in all this? Was he a willing accomplice, or was he an unwitting partner?
Well, I don't know the details about it. He has written a book, and I think that he has also been grilled fairly much, and that he had part of the guilt. After all, he was the head of the CIA, and the CIA came up with many conclusions that were not correct. I mean, one of the worst cases, I think, had to do with the contract that allegedly had been concluded between Iraq and the state of Niger about the import of uranium oxide. Now, this story originally came from Italy, it had gone through the UK, through France, and the American and CIA picked it up. And they had doubts about it. But nevertheless, the doubts about the veracity of it did not stop President Bush from speaking directly about it in the US Congress, in the State of the Union message. I mean, I think that's a fantastic scandal that this was a pure forgery. And my colleague Mohammed El-Baradei revealed in the Security Council that was a forgery, although he was diplomatically courteous and he said that it was not authentic. But the reality was it was a forgery. And this was served to the whole world and to the American public.
Mr. Hans Blix, we'll take a short break now. When we come back, I'm going to ask Mr. Blix whether he thinks the Iraq war was an illegal war. Stay with us.
The policy was set. The war in Iraq was coming, and they were looking for intelligence to fit into the policy, to justify the policy. Tyler Drumheller, former CIA chief, clandestine operations of Europe.